The Moggcast, a fortnightly conversation with Jacob Rees Mogg about the topics of the day.
Welcome to episode 29 of the Moggcast. This is a croaky-voiced Paul Goodman, editor of Conservative Home, in conversation again with the suave and immaculate Jacob Rees Mogg. Jacob, welcome. And let's start, since our listeners will be hearing this on the morning of the second ballot of the Conservative leadership and election, and you're a prominent Boris Johnson supporter. Am I speaking to the next Chancellor of the Exchequer?
I think that's extremely unlikely. I'm backing Boris unconditionally, that I think he is the best person to lead the country, to lead the Conservative Party, to get out of the European Union and set a vision for the future. And it's not about me.
He's not offered you a job.
Boris has very sensibly not been making promises to people.
You're not going to be party chairman.
Boris, I saw Andrew Jimson was suggesting that in The Sun, but Boris is wisely not making offers and guarantees that it puts future leaders in an impossible position if they start doing that.
Yes, my summary of Andrew's column in our news links yesterday was, we need more old Etonians, which is an unusual point of view in modern Britain. Let's get back to this leadership election more closely. Is it now inevitable that Boris Johnson is going to win? Is it the case, as I rather unwisely put it on a podcast last week, that not even Boris Johnson can now stop Boris Johnson?
No election is over until the votes have been counted, and you may think that's just a trite cliche, but look what happened at the general election in 2017, when initially it looked as if Theresa May was going to get a majority of 100, and she then ended up getting no overall majority. And until people vote, you can't be certain. It looks very positive for Boris at the moment. His campaign is going well. He's putting forward sensible policies. People feel that he is the right person to lead, but things can go wrong. So I wouldn't take anything as in the bag.
Why is he doing so well? We had, in our calculation, roughly 75 undeclared Conservative MPs or uncommitted Conservative MPs on the morning of the vote. We think he took 30, assuming that MPs voted for who they said they voted for. We think he took 30. Jeremy Hunt, on the same measure, would have taken 7. What's driving Boris's success in the contest so far?
The reason Boris is doing so well is that people recognise that he is the one person who can both get us out of the European Union and win a general election. How can he get us out of the European Union? Well, partly it's the law, but partly he has force of personality. And in a negotiation, one of the most important cards is actually having a forceful and strong personality and the conviction that you will do what you say, which then transmutes itself to the other side of the negotiation, who takes what you say seriously. So that's one side of it, that people think he can do well in EU negotiations because of his force of personality. The other thing is, he has a unique ability to connect with British voters. I don't think there is a single other politician in this country who, when out campaigning, people stop their cars to get out to shake him by the hand. I think Boris can do that, and nobody else can. And why is that important? Well, elections are won by being able to communicate with voters, and Boris is fantastically good at that, and voters like him.
Just going off on a tangent for a moment and talking of connecting with voters and the X factor in making a big hit, hasn't, in a certain way, this contest so far been an extraordinary triumph for Rory Stewart, who is at the bottom of the poll of the remaining survivors in the contest, but has waged a brilliant guerrilla campaign on Twitter. Other people have their chiefs of staff, their videos, their very carefully staged return home so you can see where they came from, their fundraising. Rory has dashed around with just Twitter notifying his followers that he's in Kew Gardens or whatever, and has achieved a certain amount of momentum. What do you think of the Rory Stewart phenomenon?
I've known Rory a very long time. We were actually in the same house at school, although he's 5 years younger than I am, so when I was 18, he was 13. And he has always been one of the most strikingly brilliant people I have known, and even as a 13-year-old made that clear impression as somebody of extraordinary talent. And I think we are seeing that in his campaign. And he is the real deal. I mean, Rory is as Rory is, and that I think people like. In a way, it's a similar quality to Boris, that they're both very straightforward individuals. What people see and what they get is the same, and that is very popular.
What do you remember about him at 13?
He was strikingly intelligent.
No incident in particular. It's just a general memory.
That's right. We were in the same house and therefore saw quite a bit of each other in the way that you do. The houses are quite small at Eton, about 50 or 60 boys. And he was one of the leaders of his year.
There's no intrinsic reason in your view why there shouldn't be two Elditonians in the final, by the way.
No, why only two? I mean, the more the merrier. No, to be serious for a moment. I think that it is important that people, regardless of their background, are able to put their names forward. And if they get votes, they get votes. And I don't think you should discriminate against Elditonians or anybody else for that matter.
You don't have a preferred final yourself, a final you think would be best for the party or the country?
No, I don't. Also, I think if you're backing one candidate, it's not really your business to try and work out who the other candidate ought to be. It ought to be whoever the democratic mechanism sends forth.
Just going back to Boris Johnson for a moment, I want to return to this thought about an election because the Conlon thesis, which may be wrong, because this is a flawed world, is as follows. The Prime Minister tried 3 times to get her withdrawal agreement through, failed. It seems to us unlikely that any other leader is going to get it through. And my understanding of Boris Johnson's position is, in fact, he's not going to try, he's going to do something else. However, the prospects for all the other options also look pretty daunting, in that if you support a second referendum, the only candidate who did, Sam Guimard, has withdrawn, you would need a bill, and the support for a second referendum, let alone a bill, doesn't really seem to be there. At the other extremity of the debate, of course, the natural setting is a no deal, that's the default. And one must bear in mind it's possible that the EU might kick us out if we can't continue to make up our minds. But with the speaker we have, it's not impossible that the Commons could continue to frustrate no deal in some way. So the thesis would be, actually, this Commons is unlikely to be able to get anything through. So we're likely to be heading towards a general election. The colleagues have spotted that, and that's why they're rallying to Boris in larger than expected numbers.
Well, I think we do have an addled parliament. I think it is as addled as any parliament since that in the reign of King James I. It is unable to pass any legislation. It's why we've been discussing wild animals and circuses and things of trivial importance. And therefore you are right to say that it would be hard to get anything through, regardless pretty much of what it was. But the counter to that is that it's hard to get anything through that stops us leaving under the default position, under the Withdrawal Act and under the Article 50 Act. So, yes, there's an activist speaker. Yes, there are many people in the House of Commons who don't want to leave without a deal, indeed don't want to leave full stop and pretend that the deal is the issue. It isn't really, it's they don't want to leave. How do they stop that? There are 2 routes of stopping it. One is a vote of no confidence, which would lead to a general election, and the other is revocation of the Article 50 notification. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is either of those actually going to happen? Look at the tangles the Remainers get into about revocation. Many people who one knows are deeply committed to being members of the European Union still don't dare say that they want to revoke. They still wrap it up in all sorts of bubble wrap to pretend it's something else. And so if you face them with the choice of voting for a revoke bill, I think you'd find that hard to get through. And then you take the issue of a vote of no confidence in a general election. Well, a number of things there. First of all, which Conservative really wants to put Jeremy Corbyn in Downing Street. And that's a real risk if we have a general election. Who are these people? Does Oliver Letwin really want to do that? And he's not the only name. So if you assume that the Tory vote holds pretty strong, you've then got the question for what do you do if you're a member of Change UK or whatever its name happens to be at the moment? Do you really want an election tomorrow when you haven't really got your party going or underway? You would be wiped out. There'd be no change, would there? As Theresa May used to like to say in different circumstances. Lots of Labour MPs do not want Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. So, yes, it's theoretically possible, but it's quite hard to get a majority for a vote of no confidence, I would think. On the other hand, to weigh in the balance, as you rightly say, the polling seems to suggest that the Conservative Party, led by Boris Johnson, could win a general election under those circumstances, whereas it couldn't under anybody else. But that makes the general election less rather than more likely, because it means that Jeremy Corbyn is less likely to want to put down the vote of no confidence in the first place.
Just on a point of fact, my understanding is that Dominic Grieve, it's evidently very painful to him, suggested that he wouldn't support government in a vote of confidence if there was a prospect of no deal, and Ken Clarke seems to have said the same yesterday in an interview in The Observer. So that's just 2 votes down for a start.
Well, they've got to face the reality of putting Jeremy Corbyn into office or taking that risk. Do they really mean that? Will they really do that when that happens? I'm the most hard-left leader of the Labour Party in its post-war history.
Just going back to the situation in this Parliament, if you can't make a decision, and we agree that this Parliament finds it very hard to make a decision, a course one can take is to extend. And pretty much from the start of this leadership election, that's been Michael Gove's last resource. He doesn't want to do it, but in extremis, he'd extend. Jeremy Hunt has said the same thing. Are we certain that up against the October the 31st deadline, Boris Johnson wouldn't seek to extend? Because there is some nervousness among some Brexiteers that they look at Boris's positions on policy and say, well, he's been really quite malleable and flexible over the years. So we really can't be sure.
I think extension would be a grave error, that it would reinvigorate, reinforce the Brexit Party. It would be very destructive for the Conservative Party. And if you listen to what Boris has said, one of the reasons I think he's got a lot of support is that he understands that. To go back to a question, they think Boris is an election winner. Yes, the reason people think Boris is an election winner is because he has read the political tea leaves and understands that if we don't leave on the 31st or by the 31st of October, there's no Tory party to lead.
And does anyone mind me saying that Boris has got the support both of Robert Buckland, who's a very distinguished figure on the centre-left of the Tory party, and Marc-François Say, who's a very well-known figure on the right of the Conservative Party. And the argument would be one of these chaps is going to be disappointed.
No, Robert is a very sensible, good man, very popular within the Conservative Party. And he was involved, as I was, in discussions around the Malthouse Compromise. The Malthouse Compromise accepted that leaving without a deal was a possibility, not a preferred option, but a possibility. And I think there are actually many people in the party who realise that we have to leave in accordance with the referendum. It would be better to get a deal, which is very much my position, very much Boris's position, but that in the event we don't get a deal, we still have to leave. And I think there's more unity in the party than there sometimes appears to be.
When tonight's ballot, this afternoon's ballot is over, who are you expecting to have been knocked out?
I'm very reluctant to say because, although I obviously have private thoughts on this matter, I don't want to be disagreeable about the candidates that I'm not supporting. And I think for me to say X, Y, and Z will be knocked out is sort of knocking copy of a kind I don't want to produce.
while this leadership contest is going on, one view is that with eyes elsewhere, it's spend, and regulate. With Theresa May, there's a spending review due, but a whole mass of things seem to be happening in advance of the spending review, such as, for example, the commitment that I understand will be put through, presumably by SI, to aim for zero carbon by 2050. Now, it may be right to do this and it may not, but given it's got spending implications, is it really right to do this before the spending review and just on the verge of having another leader and prime minister in place?
It seems to me to be eccentric at best. I don't understand what is being aimed at. That the Prime Minister has been Prime Minister for 3 years. Why is everything happening in the last 3 weeks with no legislative ability to get it through? No bills are going through Parliament. I think these are sort of signs being written up as to what the Prime Minister might have liked to have done rather than actual things that are happening. I don't think they have any substance.
It couldn't be anything to do with wanting to leave a legacy, could it?
It's very strange, this whole legacy idea. I don't really understand why Prime Ministers fret about this. It seems to me that if a Prime Minister goes in and wants to do the right thing and does the right thing, then the legacy takes care of itself. And that worrying about the legacy is pointless and self-defeating.
If Boris Johnson wins, what do you think the timetable should be? I mean, there was some discussion over the weekend about pulling the membership stage entirely. Do you have a view on that?
Yes, I do. I think that if you look at the last two coronations of Theresa May and of Gordon Brown, they didn't go well either for the party or for the country. That testing people in a campaign is a really good idea, but also you've published, helpfully, the hustings schedule. And that means that the two candidates will have to go up and down the country selling their wares. And that's a rather good thing. There is a constitutional problem that we have, and it would be foolish of me to ignore this, that a new Prime Minister doesn't automatically have to have a new general election. And you and I know perfectly well how the Constitution works, and all the listeners to this know that we don't elect a Prime Minister, we elect a Parliament. But we also all know that when we go and cast our vote, we are voting for a Prime Minister as well as for the local Member of Parliament and for the party. Therefore, to have no mechanism for the leaders to show themselves to the whole country, I think would be a great mistake. And I think it's incumbent upon it. I'd go as far as to say it's the duty of the person who is in the second round, or the people in the second round, let's not take things for granted, to go through this, even if one of them is way ahead of the other, even if one of them looks almost certain to win. The person in the second place has that duty to fulfill and to do it with energy.
I must say, to me, it looks as though any of the candidates who may come second if Boris Johnson comes first will see it through.
I think you're right. They've all made strong commitments to that effect. The worry is that they will try to do a backroom deal and they'll say, give us a job and I'll let you have it. I think that type of politics is the politics that the British electorate is most fed up with. And therefore, I don't think either party would do it. So the other person in the last two, in our imaginary calculation, will almost certainly have to be given a job in any event, and arguably would get and deserve a better one if they take Boris Johnson, the front runner, through his paces and enable him to see what he's made of. I think that's right, and may fight a very good campaign and rise in people's estimation. Also, that'll be a real job for the new leader, whoever it is, of trying to unite and balance the party, and that shouldn't be ignored.
Do you think Labour will try to no confidence the new leader as soon as he arrives at the end of July, or should we not assume the Commons will necessarily be sitting when the new leader arrives?
Constitutionally, the Commons does not need to be sitting for the new Prime Minister. In my view, it would be better if the Commons were sitting. We know how the system works. The Prime Minister has to command the confidence of the House of Commons. What we don't want to have is a situation where officials are saying to the new Prime Minister, you can't do that because I'm not sure you've got the confidence of the House of Commons, and therefore this is only a beginning of a Prime Ministership. The levers of power aren't yet fully in your hands. I think it needs to be clear before the summer recess that the new leader is the new Prime Minister.
So actually, from the point of view of good governance of the country and for the interest of the Conservative Party, it would be best if the new Prime Minister came back, had a week or so in front of the Commons to bed down, and then was able, over the summer recess, to shuffle his cabinet, make some announcements, take a few decisions, get the Brexit negotiating position in good order, and be able to come back to the Commons in September.
I think that's a sensible outline. The timing, I think, works, that the leader will be announced at the end of July. Parliament could sit to the end of July. There would be a few days of a new leader. I think that is a good way of proceeding.
Is it true that potential Boris Johnson voters were asked to photograph their ballot papers in the first ballot?
As far as I'm aware, it's completely and utterly false. I've sat in a lot of meetings with Boris Johnson supporters, with other MPs, with people involved in the campaign, and I never heard of this for a moment.
Well, we're going to know at the end of this evening who has come through and who has dropped out. There'll be much more to talk about when we resume the Mogcast in a fortnight. We will know who has got through the parliamentary phase. So until then, Jacob, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. We might also know how England are doing in the World Cup cricket. I'm not quite sure whether we've got to the final of that as well by this stage, but that's also keeping us entertained.
And nor am I, but we'll find out then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Mogcast, a fortnightly conversation with Jacob Rees Mogg about the topics of the day.